Well, today I launch back into a critique that I will make in contrast to other people's critiques of Final Fantasy 15 in saying these things. Prove that I'm among the faithful here and prove that at least I'm in Square Enix's wheelhouse and staying in it without having to refer to Baldur's Gate as I did in other critiques that I've made of it. I have to admit that I have seen it mantraed so many times by now by other people and fans of the Final Fantasy fandom that Final Fantasy 15 has flaws, but they were easy to overlook and that they enjoyed the game despite these flaws and everything. And they say that they loved it anyways, despite these flaws. And I'm like, this rhetorical point is a little bit annoying because it gets said ad nauseum, about things, but it makes me think about this, and I think about another game Square Enix made that reminds me of the flaws that I would point to in Final Fantasy V's, not 5, but 15, sorry, mentally by the reason that misspeaking happens is because of the fact that I'm not so used to Roman numerals. It's been a while, but no, 15's story is, the people that have pointed to the flaws with it will say that it's unfinished in that sense. There's a lot, I found that it isn't just a Luna Freya thing but for me, that was bad enough on its own. If you watch my other video on it, the disjointed narrative, the way the story is not told in a coherent fashion, the way that you're supposed to consume supplementary content to consume Final Fantasy 15, the way that even if the Brotherhood ideas appealed to you, which it didn't to me, but your mileage may vary. I'm not saying you owe it to me to hate it, to dislike that part of the story. I mean, go ahead, disagree with me on that. You would still be confronted with a story that left most of what was going on explained unless you had consumed that supplementary content, which is very disappointing. It's a train wreck. It's not easy to overlook such glaring flaws with Final Fantasy 15. Xenogears, great game, unfinished. Sometimes it doesn't go about telling its story in the most effective way to get you to understand what's really going on. And the game turns into basically a visual novel on the second disc. It clearly suffered the same sort of, deadline problems that happened on the Final Fantasy 15 team. And I mean, I know that the game was being developed for 10 years, but 15 feels still like it, despite all of that, even though it was 10 years long, it still has a feeling of being rushed, like to such an extent that it's comparable to Chinese, high rises. The Potumkin villages were rushed, like it's more rushed than that. And yet it was in development for over 10 years and everything, and they still couldn't get it. My ultimate feeling about 15 is that it should not have been released at all. What should have happened is that Square Enix should have taken a look at it and been like, this project has gone over budget. It's been going on for 10 years now. What we should do with it is just scrap it. I attribute part of the problem to the so human, impulse towards, to the game was a sunk cost after 10 years. They just wanted to get all that work, released out in some form because they'd been working on it for so long. But by contrast, see, the problem with doing that with 15 is that first of all, I'm not the only person complaining about the story quality of 15. I mean, game FAQ forums, people do it all the time. These people are not trying to troll. There are reasons why people might do this. They might feel that there's an underrated RPG compared to it, and that 15 is outshining it, despite the fact that it doesn't deserve to outshine it. In my case, I would point to Xenogears outshining, being outshone by the very, very overrated Final Fantasy 15, which is very glaringly flawed and a challenge to actually overlook the flaws that are in the system, whereas Xenogears is flawed in a very similar fashion, and yet it's easy to overlook the flaws with Xenogears. They're very obvious. It does get, after the first disc, it does have that feeling of being rushed. It does have that feeling of it turns into an exposition dump, where it's mostly a visual novel that tells you how things go on that, second disc and everything. But it's still one of the best damn stories that I have seen ever in any RPG, period. And this is what irritates me about the other critics of, the game, is that they will basically say that, it's unfinished. Well, Xenogears was unfinished and it's lovable, is what I end up thinking in all of this. Now, I would... Oh, man. I mean, it is a very broken game, but it still ends up being lovable. And this is what irritates me about the other critics. It's becoming a near mantra to basically say that Final Fantasy 15 is flawed, but they loved it anyways. I'm like, that's what it triggers within me. I don't, when I lash out at 15, I don't do it from a place of, frustration and when I go into a forum with it, I don't go into it because I want to ruin anybody's day that is into this, despite the flaws with it or any of those things. What I'm trying to do is basically say, like, look, there's a game that's flawed in a very similar way that you've overlooked and everything, that I wish that was more popular and everything. Could you do me a solid and actually, play it and watch it and everything, or at least go through it and everything and buy yourself a copy of it, because it's definitely worth it. It's flawed in a very similar way to Final Fantasy 15, but it is a lot more lovable than Final Fantasy 15.